All right, you guys, this is the Iran War sitrep for March 23rd, 2026. I think it's fair to say there's no end in sight. You guys, if you're just joining, and I don't really make these videos for people who are just joining. I probably should do more for people who are just joining, but I find you can just catch up, right? We start from where we start. You're looking for something about what's going on and you find this and maybe you stay. So I don't, necessarily need to tell you my perspective. You'll just absorb it from what I'm saying. But the notion here at this channel is that we are doing military analysis that is based on having some, I used to call it non-disdain for Arab and Muslim military thinking and militaries. But now I think we could go so far as to say respect for, you can take the word respect in many different ways. But my point is the analysts the reason I started this was most of the analysts that have a really good military information are either racist or just kind of uninformed or disdainful of anything to do with whether it's Palestinian armed struggle or Hezbollah or Iran or Yemen and Ansar Allah. So that's the gap that I'm trying to fill here. Is historically informed and ultimately trying to understand the resistance forces militarily in terms of what they do and in terms of what they say. A lot of channels and a lot of other commentators on the military side will look at what they'll look almost extensively at what Western sources say about resistance in the Arab and Muslim world, but not what they actually say. And so I think it's important to look at not just what they're doing or what other people say about them, but what they actually are saying themselves. So that's where I'm coming from. You guys, you can take that. You can at least have a sense of what you're getting before we get into it. The last video was on March 15th. And last video was the past couple of videos were an hour long and they were thematically organized. And this week I'm trying something else. I'm gonna try to go chronologically. Fundamentally, I do try to just a lot of what I do and the way that I think is in terms of this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Or maybe you could say, as they do in writing advice, therefore this happened, and therefore this happened. So there's a lot of work just in chronology, just in remembering what happened when. And so I'm just going to go day by day from March 15th until tonight, which is March 23rd, 2026. And I'm going to just tell you what happened, okay? You guys were here, probably, but it's a bewildering time. It's a bewildering week, and a lot has happened. An awful lot has happened. So March 15th, highlights for me were there's a lot that went on, but I'll catch you up on March 17th in terms of some things that happened on the 15th, whatever. But one of my favorite spokespeople from Ansar Allah is al-Bukhaiti, and he had years ago there was an amazing interview that I always refer back to when Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone interviewed al-Bukhaiti, and Bukhaiti said, basically he said, Yemen was already being bombed after they took that ship and they began to attack Israel, and they kind of joined the war, and in return they were bombed. Their whole government was killed. I think thousands of people in Yemen were killed. infrastructure, everything as usual is genocidal methods of war that Israel and the U.S. do. And al-Bukhaiti said, people in the Arab world have said they feel bad for us. And he said, you feel bad for us, but we feel bad for you because you can't do anything about what's going on in Gaza, and we can. So, and that just, that tells me that's like one of the most amazing things that somebody could say, right? You're being bombed, and you feel bad for the people who are helpless and who, in many cases possibly just aren't as courageous, but also don't have the opportunity. Anyway, al-Bukhaiti said on March 15th, this war will soon become a ground war. Soldiers in the Saudi, Emirati, Qatari, Kuwaiti, and Jordanian armies must ready to redirect their rifles at USA and Israel when the opportunity comes. Free Muslims will march to liberate Jerusalem. And so I think that tells you something about the horizon, that the resistance is thinking about this now, and arguably they always have been for years. Nasrallah would refer to these kinds of things coming in the future, but I do think that this is now the future, and they're starting to talk about it in those terms. Iran, on March 16th, there was a message that Ali Abu Nima put on his Twitter feed. It was like a 6-point statement for Muslims. So this was, the resistance was talking to the, non-participating, non-resistance Muslim countries. And the points were, number one, the Americans and Zionists are the aggressors. They're trying to dismantle Iran. Two, so far, with rare cases, no Islamic State has stood by the Iranian people. Three, Iran is continuing on the path of resistance. Four, so it's un-Islamic. Actually, they're kind of arguing to attack Iran for resisting the U.S. and Israel. Four, he says, some countries, or the Iranian statement says, some countries have gone so far as to say that Iran has become an enemy because it targeted American bases on their lands. Is Iran expected to stand idly by while American bases in your countries are used to attack it? The confrontation today is between America and Israel on one side, and Iran, the Muslim nation, and the forces of resistance on the other. Which side will you stand with? Five, you know that America has no loyalty to you and Israel is your enemy. Reflect on yourselves and the future of the region. Iran is sincere and does not seek to dominate you. Six, the unity of the Islamic Ummah, if achieved with full strength, is capable of guaranteeing security, progress, and independence. This was a statement by Ali Larijani, who was martyred the day after this statement on March 17th, or maybe the day of. Ali Larijani was killed by the Israelis or the Americans in an airstrike on his home with members of his family. And that was on March 17th. On March 17th, also, Joe Kent, who was the anti-terrorism something in America, and obviously a diehard Trumper, and still is, by the way he's talking, quit. He resigned. He said, Iran's no threat to us, and I can't pretend that they are. And, I don't know, that was all the way on March 17th. So people felt like maybe that was going to be a big deal, and maybe the tip of the spear. But I think it's more like catalyst for turning him into a media personality. And what I saw of him, I saw clips. I didn't sit and watch. I'm not going to sit and watch a multi-hour thing. I'm sure you guys can watch it, so I don't have to. Please feel free to summarize the main points of when he went on Tucker. But it feels to me like it's kind of fizzled. I saw a clip of him basically saying Trump was forced into the war because he was afraid for his family. But I don't think that's to his credit. Everybody in the resistance's family is under threat and they still resist. Nobody can make you do a genocide because they threaten your family. So that doesn't impress me, and I don't believe it either. So that is the only real clip that I saw. And I feel like March 17th to March 23rd was Joe Kent's. That's about it for Joe Kent. I do hope more people resign. I do wish the best to the people who feel like America should not be doing everything for Israel. I think if when America stops doing everything for Israel, the world will be a better place. But I don't know how. I question the sincerity of this movement. I question whether it's a movement at all, and so it's just not that big of a deal to me. So if it's a big deal to you, that's great. But I'll be moving on. So an interesting pseudonymous, I guess, I don't know, anti-Israel military analyst is Coke, 0x Coked. And I just wanted to share this because people keep, the nuclear dooming continues. I tried to address it last video, and the nuclear dooming, I mean, I don't, what can I say? I don't want to, I'm not a nuclear booster. I don't love the idea, but I do think that, the threat of it is basically trying to tell people to surrender because we have this God. We are gods. We can end the world. And Iran has already taken that into account, and Iran is not playing that game. But 0x Coked had a number of points about why the Israeli Samson option, which is if Israel, decides to, they'll take the world down with them through nukes, referring to the biblical story of Samson and Delilah, where Samson, is so strong and he breaks the pillars down and he brings the pillars of the temple down and kills everybody in it, including himself. And 0x Coke says Israel doesn't have a true nuclear triad. They have garbage tier diesel submarines that barely work, are easily tracked, and cannot field a true second strike capability. 2, their ICBM silos are clustered together in extremely limited space under constant surveillance by various states, and the country lacks the strategic depth to field more hidden silos. Any activity there could be easily preempted and destroyed. This is the primary reason why Israel is so paranoid about Iran, as they know Iran has this capability. 3, ICBMs are most easily intercepted in their boost phase, and there's various countries in the region with SM-6 tier interceptors that could easily disrupt that, including Turkey and Egypt. I don't think Turkey and Egypt would do a thing against Israel, even to stop a nuke. They will do absolutely nothing, so that point I dispute. 4, Air Force-based nuke launches would be easily intercepted or dealt with and have the most limited scope and range. I think that's hopeful, but I do think that we have to admit that Israel has managed to hit plenty of targets inside Iran with their air force, even if they don't fly over, and presumably if they're doing the Samson option, they'll be willing to take casualties in order to drop these nuclear weapons. I wouldn't necessarily say easily intercepted and dealt with, but there it is. And number 4, another interesting point, the majority of Israeli power players are stakeholders in massive foreign investments in diaspora, so they never actually have nothing to lose, which is the primary fantasy behind the Samson option. That, I think, is a really good point. They would also be deterred by those consequences. The entire point of the Samson option is to generate an aura of unpredictability and wildness, which plays in favor of the unpredictable party for purposes of negotiation and international flexing. It is also designed to intimidate Westerners, the main people obsessed with the Samson option, into a feeling of helplessness and political capture. culture. You ever see Iranians talk about it? No, because they do not care. They have an Islamic martyr culture, and that's why it doesn't work on them, and the Israelis don't even bother. And then he follows up with, the theory that Iran already has ICBMs, nuclear weapons, advanced space program, and Iran is firmly in the driver's seat. And all of that is possible too. It's possible. The stuff they say, they've said they have weapons that are surprises even after the weapons they've shown. And they, every time they say that, they do come up with something that's quite surprising. And so there's something to the Iranian strategy facing a Western, a U.S. Israeli system that is based on lying when it matters and when it doesn't matter, and at all times for any reason. And the Iranians have just told the truth, which is another reason I'm not sure they have a nuclear weapon, but because they said they don't, and they said they don't want one, and they don't seem to lie. So they said they don't want one, but like their methodical telling of their systematic truth telling is also first of all, it's scary in a way, because when they say they're going to do something, they do it, and they say things that Israel and the US don't want them to do, and then they do them, and they do them not as a surprise. And so that in some ways is more power. I think I've said this in previous videos, it's more powerful to say you're going to do something and do it than to do it as a sneak attack. Of course, surprise is an advantage, but if you have those kinds of abilities and you don't even need surprise, that's another level, right? Okay. So we're on March 18th. So they already assassinated Larijani and another IRGC spokesman. On March 18th, they attack the gas infrastructure. That's the middle of the week, right? That was Wednesday. And they attacked the largest gas field in the world, Pars gas field, which is jointly owned by Iran and Qatar. And Iran immediately countered by attacking a whole bunch of oil and gas installations in UAE, Qatar, I think Kuwait, and Saudi. And they said, we destroyed as much as you destroyed. Next time we destroy everything, which is going to come into play probably tonight, but we're still on March 18th. So they said, we destroyed as much as you destroyed. The balance, the bill is settled. Next time we turn everything to ash. So that was March 18th. That was the turning point, I would say. That was a day when things were trending, and then we stepped up. And I don't know in terms of inevitability, but it does feel, especially after tonight, that the destruction of all the gas and oil in the Gulf region is probably inevitable. I don't see anybody with any sense on the US-Israeli side, or that they can help themselves. The scorpion and the frog parable, where the frog takes the scorpion across the river and the scorpion bites the frog in the middle of the river. And as they go down, the frog says, "Why did you do it?" And the scorpion says, "It's in my nature," right? You guys have probably all heard that parable, probably in the context of even this war. It's in their nature. It's in their nature, even if they're going to drown themselves. So after March 18th, we saw the no more Mr. Nice Guy position from the UAE and Saudi in particular, saying we can't coexist with Iran threatening us like this. We exist to be slaves to the Americans and the Israelis. We're not able to, we can't coexist with a country that's also Muslim, that's our neighbor, that's been our neighbor forever. We can't coexist with that. So we're going to have to join the war. And so, now might be a good point to say that the UAE and Saudi, like France and Britain and Germany, add nothing. They add absolutely nothing. They have the same equipment that the Americans have, except they don't know how to use it. They have great positioning for bases and attack, an attack configuration to attack Iran, which is why Iran blew up those bases starting on the first day of the war and has been steadily attacking those bases and destroying them. And therefore, they're not available to the UAE or Saudi to attack Iran from either. So this is, it's the idea that they're going to do something to Iran that the US and Israel have not been able to do, is a bit ridiculous. On the other hand, they're making a statement, and it's a strong statement, and it's going to gives additional license to Iran to treat them as a belligerent and include them in the post-war configuration. Because if you look at like World War One, which I've studied extensively and which you can study extensively if you visit my website and listen to our podcast on World War One. Let me just double check how many episodes there are in that podcast. It's some 30 hours or so. It's called World War Civ. It's just scrolling. Just give me a minute to scroll. 30 hours? No, it's 51 episodes. And then we did a separate series just on the thing I'm going to get to, a 14-part series on the Treaty of Versailles. So in 1919, the powers, Britain, America, France, basically got together in Paris. They heard delegations from all over the world, and they came together to make a peace treaty, a comprehensive peace treaty, not a ceasefire, a comprehensive peace treaty for how the world was going to work after World War One. And they imposed that on Germany, which was one of the causes of World War Two, because they were, because of the way that they created this League of Nations, and they kept imperialism going, and they took, Germany felt aggrieved because they took Germany's colonies, and they dismantled the Ottoman Empire, and they gave Palestine to the Jewish community. They had Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, who Rothschild family is Epstein's employer. So the Epstein class was active in this peace conference. But my point for the purposes of this video and this discussion, is that this was a 6-month-long meeting in Paris, primarily by the victors, to redraw the map of the world based on the power that they had proven that they had to shape the future of the world. And that is what Iran is going for. I don't know if Iran will get everything that they want. Maybe they will. But that's what they're going for. They're going for complete changes to the world order being that the world bows at the feet of the genocidal, pedophilic, monstrous class that rules Israel and America, and Iran, and wants to destroy and murder all Palestinians, all Lebanese, all Iranians, kills schoolgirls, delights in calling for the murder of more children everywhere all the time, has cults of sexual abuse, pardons sexual abusers, apologizes to rapists, and on and on. You guys know these people. And Iran demands a world order where they don't have to worry about being on the chopping block for destruction by this class of people again. And what is it going to take to reach that situation, that is what Iran is going for. That is the war aim. And at the end of this war, if Iran wins, they are going to have a long peace treaty that, if, like I said, if Iran wins, will probably include the Palestinians having Palestine back and all the bases gone, and a totally different system for oil and its administration and where it goes and how it goes there and who benefits. And if Iran follows through tonight or in the future on destroying the oil and gas of the Gulf and the power plants, then that change will become a fact on the ground that will then become solidified in some way after the war. So March 18th is what makes that, that much more likely of a final outcome. It's what makes any kind of stopping short of that much less of an option, that much less likely. Now, that was 5 days ago. How about March 19th? So March 19th, Thursday morning, Trump, says something like, listen, we didn't know about the gas field. Qatar had nothing to do with it. Iran shouldn't have attacked Qatar back, and we won't do any more attacks on the infrastructure. But if Iran does, then we're going to destroy everything. So it was like Iran had just said yesterday that they were going to destroy everything, and then on March 18th, and then on March 19th, Trump said, yeah, well, we're going to destroy everything. So the fact that this is the heat level of the rhetoric as well as the bombings, again, it gets harder and harder to imagine the Gulf oil infrastructure surviving this war. We can hope. A lot of it is already destroyed and will not be back. And so the reverberations have not even yet really begun to be felt. So Iran attacks Qatar, Saudi, UAE gas fields and Haifa refinery. I believe the Haifa refinery attack was also on the 19th. Also on the 19th, Iran hits an F-35. The United States says it was just a malfunction. I don't know if it's better. It's weird that the U.S. has a malfunction on one, toilet paper, and then a laundry fire on another, 30-hour laundry fire that'll take 14 months to repair on an aircraft carrier. So probably it was hit, and they say it was hit by a thermal system. So the F-35 is their stealth aircraft. We already know from lore that the F-35 is the most expensive plane ever. It's also, it's this 5th generation plane. It's very stealthy. It's hard to pick up on radar. And so the trick Iran used, again, this mentality that Iran has, right? Where the highest tech stealth, and then Iran is using heat signatures to track it and possibly a shoulder launched missile to hit it, because the path that it takes is kind of predictable. So they know where to look, and then they hit the heat signature. So it's just this is, I believe I said the night before the war started that this is going to be the most high tech mathematical, that I know that they know, and then the missile trajectories and the counter, and that's the nature of this. That's the nature of this war. And hitting an F-35 is just one example of this. The warnings, like because Professor Morandi, who unbelievable stuff with Professor Morandi on Twitter. Twitter, there's pro-Israeli people on Twitter trying to raise $1 million bounty for the kidnapping of Professor Morandi, who's in Iran. But the 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 vileness of Twitter, as well as the vileness of these people, really knows no bounds. You can raise funds to put a bounty on someone over an open Twitter, and people have been calling Twitter out about it for days, and it's still going on. But Prof. Morandi, in June 2025, he basically said, "Look, if America and Israel attack Iran again in earnest," and he's not like an oracle. He says the same things that he hears from public statements by Iranian officials. He's just like saying in English and in lots of audiences and in a really good way, because he's really good at it. He's saying these things that everybody in Iran knows and hears. But he said, we'll destroy all the bases, we'll destroy all the, and if they attack our energy, we'll destroy all the energy. And if they attack, these family dictatorships, he calls them, could be on the chopping block themselves. So they should be very careful in terms of helping US and Israel. And because the war started in March and went exactly as he said it would, it probably behooves anybody who speaks English to see what he's saying now. And on March 19th, when Saudi threatened Saudi Arabia and said, they were going to take military action against Iran, Professor Morandi said the Saudi regime encouraged the war against Iran and provided airspace and air bases. If it strikes the Islamic Republic, it will swiftly be destroyed. And that's also not the first time Iran has, been at odds with Saudi. And China brokered a kind of a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi. It was a remarkable event. China put a lot of work into that years ago. But Saudi then hosted the US to attack Iran, and Iran is hitting them now as a result. And so their threats, like I said, are not going to, they don't offer anything more to the US in terms of their ability to damage Iran. But like Professor Morandi says, they are putting themselves, so it's one, Iran has been very scrupulous about only hitting US infrastructure in these countries. Then when the energy infrastructure was hit, they hit the energy infrastructure. But if the country joins as a belligerent, if UAE and Saudi make a formal decision to join as belligerents, which I think they either have done or are about to do, then that is a new level of license in terms of the post-war settlement, where Iran, may decide that these states, they may decide that, on a different configuration for the land and for the state and for the resources. And that's often what happens after big cataclysmic. That's what happened after World War I anyway, and it happened after World War II as well, but I haven't reached that point in my historical podcast, so I'm not as well versed. I only really know what I've already covered in the historical podcast. So another a Yemeni commentator, Al-Mutawakkil, he kind of counted how much each Gulf state paid for their security arrangements to the U.S. Saudi Arabia paid 39 billion, UAE 15.5 billion, Qatar 7.5 billion, Kuwait 4.5 billion, Bahrain 2.5 billion. And Al-Mutawakkil says these countries paid a hefty price for American air defense systems, only to discover today that they were funding a shield that protects U.S. bases and interests in the region while they were asleep. And the irony, these billions cover not just the purchase of systems like that and Patriot, but also extend to annual maintenance contracts worth billions more. Gulf states provide financial contributions toward the cost of building, operating, and maintaining U.S. bases. only God knows how large those costs are. So it's like a system like the U.S. getting a prison, a U.S. state like lobbying for a prison, lobbying for a U.S. base, which they then pay for. Their slave laborers build, and then they continue to pay the Americans, all to protect Israel ultimately, which is why I said, Greater Israel is the Gulf, and it's kind of being taken apart from the outside in, and from the outside in applies because the Americans are getting, they're moving troops out of Iraq towards Jordan and Israel, but that I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. On March 19th, the resistance in Iraq issued a warning against Syria. So the Jolani people in Syria, Al Qaeda, they're kind of like, we're going to join. They de facto they've joined Israel already, but they said, we're going to join Israel and attack Lebanon. And the Iraqi resistance basically said, if the Syrians enter the war against Hezbollah, the Iraqi militia will march into Syria. So Iraq is the Iraqi resistance, which is the majority in in Iraq. They will they'll fight if the Kurds attack Iran. That they'll find the Iraqi resistance behind them. If the Syrians attack Lebanon, they'll find the Iraqi resistance behind them. So the existence of Iraq, like Yemen, is something that the Arab countries like Syria, like the Al Qaeda, Wahhabi countries like Syria, UAE, and Saudi have to kind of hold back from doing too much or getting overexcited to attack or be sectarian or join the US, because these are reserves that haven't really joined the battle. I mean, Iraq, the militias in Iraq are fighting the US very actively, and the US has withdrawn from some bases. Like I said, that's coming. So Yemen announces on March 19th that they're going to begin Red Sea operations. They make a point of saying that Russia and China don't need to worry. Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah, says this. He says the United States, together with Israel attacking Iran, aims to leave the region entirely under Israeli control. He says, the plan to leave the region under Israeli control ran into resistance. He says they want you spineless, trivial, without identity, like cattle, or even more lost. Then they trample you with complete ease. But Gaza fought with nothing. Hezbollah fought from day one. Iran built a state that bows to no one. Yemen stood firm. These are the obstacles the Zionist plan never expected. So I think that's true, especially of Yemen. I mean, nobody saw Yemen coming in 2024, I think it was, when they joined. Okay, so the Lebanon front, just a update from Lebanon front. If you guys follow Ali Mortada, he does really extensive field reports and summaries on his Twitter feed in Arabic, but you can just click the translate button. The Scud missile is back, you guys. Lebanon used a Scud missile in one of their attacks. And there was a story from Middle East Eye. I think Middle East Eye has something to do with Qatar. So there's always that, there's a little bit of something, let's say. But they have some great stuff on there too. But there's a story called How Hezbollah Rebuilt. You guys see this one? How Hezbollah rebuilt while its enemies declared it dead. And, it's not like too super surprising if you've been following it, but they basically argue that Hezbollah had turned, gone from a kind of guerrilla force to a more conventional force when they intervened in Syria, but that brought them a whole bunch of vulnerabilities because they didn't in fact have state control in Lebanon. So they, that kind of gap between not having state power and being a semi-conventional army left communications infrastructure vulnerable, and lots of non Hezbollah. You're in a society and a state that's not necessarily supportive. So they went back to, so how did they adapt? In one word, they adapted by going back to that guerrilla style. They called it the Mughniye. So that before Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, there was, oh no, Mughniye wasn't, sorry, he wasn't a Secretary General, but he was one of their leaders and one of their military thinkers. The Mughniye spirit, the Commander Imad Mughniye, a doctrine built around dispersed semi-autonomous units. And they had the pagers, they had the phone, hardline phone network, and I think they discovered that the Israelis managed to get into all of their major communications methods. So now they've gone to real old school in-person meetings, handwritten notes, that kind of stuff. So, and it's a conscious thing, they said, extensive, methodical, disciplined. And they said it was, so basic and primitive methods, human couriers, handwritten notes, and compartmentalized channels between command and field units. A deliberate act of adaptation rather than being assigned the organization had regressed, right? So it's and so they're, they're using that same method to, with great success against the Israeli invaders of 2026, the same way that they had great success against them in 2006, probably arguably more, because, they've learned more, and the Israelis they don't really learn in that sense because they don't have to learn. They just have to try to be more vile, and they succeed. So Russia, so there's a story in Russia on March 19th where an Israeli spokeswoman says, we have cameras, we have access to the traffic cameras in Russia. We can eliminate anyone who wishes Israel ill and hopes that Russia kind of behaves themselves. So that was a pretty amazing, that's what Ali Abunimah would call chutzpah. I remember years ago he was deliberately mispronouncing chutzpah to get to annoy the Zionists that he was debating on Democracy Now! It was a long time ago. I think it was the 2014 war. And, to threaten Russia like that, it's pretty amazing. And Russia has been nothing. And some of the comments I saw are funny because it's like people saying Russia's been nothing but good to Israel. And that's ain't that the truth? After everything Russia's done for Israel, including providing millions of Russians to be Israelis. China published the Persian cats versus the white eagles. I found the ending a bit weak and peace-nicky, but that was March 19th too. If you watch that, the AI generated the animation, which is cute, but the voices, I think, voices are done by humans. It's not a sit rep if I'm not yawning, right, guys? Okay, now we're on to March 20th. By March 20th, we have more than 5,000 troops, U.S. troops, Marines, and Army headed for Iran, and nobody knows what they'll do. None of the ideas make all that much sense. The idea that they're going to take Karg Island, they have to go through the Strait of Hormuz first. I don't know. It's such a bad idea that I don't imagine they're going to do it. I don't think they're going to try to take the coastline. I don't think they're going to try to kidnap the president. But I do think there's good reasons to have troops there. And as you'll see by today, they're talking about like 2-3 times that numbers of troops. So that's quite a bit of troops. I don't believe they ever have troops just sitting around, but there are things they can do with them that don't involve the island. I'll talk about that again when I get to today. Iran says they arrested 45 separatists and mercenaries in Qazvin and West Azerbaijan. So the angle of separatists trying to declare independence from Iran with support on the border. So like they did with Afghanistan in the 80s, right? There's a huge displaced population in Afghanistan of Afghans in Pakistan, and they had these refugee camps where they organized the Mujahideen, and then they kind of deployed them out of there with plenty of Pakistani help. But none of those conditions exist in Iran, so it's going to be hard to repeat that. But it is one of their tricks. It's always good to know what their tricks are. That's definitely one of them. But we don't have that at the moment. So what angle are they going to work? I think they're probably going to go to Jordan or Israel or somewhere in Africa, maybe Djibouti. I think they're going to have them there for missions, doing things, maybe evacuating VIPs, maybe helping evacuate bases if they have to, maybe moving things here and there, sensors, weapons. So I think that if you're going to have a war with Iran, you probably want a lot of troops ready and doing things and running around and doing amphibious things and flying here and there. So I think that there's roles for them. The island, taking Karg Island is not a good idea. It's just, I cannot wrap my head around it. Maybe I'll be surprised, and maybe there's something about it that I missed. If I did miss it, I'm sure that a lot of us would have missed it. They could be there to help Israel in Lebanon or some other defensive thing for Israel, or again, seeding or stiffening some separatist movement. So March 20th, Ali Jazini, he's the Al Mayadeen military analyst, and you can often catch him on for this war, you can often catch him on the Laith Marouf hosted Wartime Cafe on Free Palestine TV. And Ali Jazini had this tweet where he said, the American and US strategy is to destroy as much of Iran's defense industry and capability, to turn it into another Syria before the regime falls, then strike wherever they want, and it's so weak that even Gulf states could hit it. So that he points out is Iran's escalation to the point of madness is necessary to inflict the maximum harm to prevent that. So if you think about what the two sides are going for, Iran is going for, like I said, a new world order where Iran and the Palestinians and everybody in the region is safe from psychotic genocidal Israel and their American unconditional backer and the greater Israel Gulf state of wealth and glitz and super profits that are funding all of this. What the Americans and the Israelis want is to attack and reset. In a couple of years, do it again. Genocide the Palestinians and reset. Go back to starving them. Genocide them again. It's incremental. It's an incremental plan. They don't have, it's an opportunistic idea. And that's the nature of settler expansion. They expand as much as they can. If they have the numbers of the master race demographics, they expand more. If they don't, they consolidate. And they just, that's to the extent that they have a long-term plan. That's their long-term plan is genocide. It's what I think Washington or Jefferson said, in the long term, we'll have a white continent without blot or blemish. But in the meantime, while the Indians are here, we'll make treaties, we'll break them later, we'll go to war, we'll kill them, starve them, then make a treaty. And that's the cycle that they want to get into with Iran. too. Sanctions, starvation, bombing, right? And they did that with Iraq starting in 1990, and they didn't finish Iraq off until 2003. And they did with Syria. They started in, you could say they started when Syria became independent in some sense, 46 or 47, but, in earnest in 2011, and they didn't finish Syria off until 2024. So Iran, they started these kinetic wars in June 2025, and if they can just keep this cycle going, and meanwhile genociding Gaza, meanwhile attacking Lebanon periodically, Lebanon, which is pre-surrendered as a state, then they can, that's their long-term goal. So Iran wants to break that cycle. That's what they've said. An Iranian brigadier general, Shekharchi, said, he said something very, very important. He said, nowhere will be safe for Israeli and U.S. military officers. They've been assassinating Iranians for so long. And so, again, it's that principle that Iran is saying it's either safe for everybody or nobody. There was on March 20th, there was a drone decorated to say revenge for Rachel Corrie. I'll just show that on the screen. And for people who don't know, Rachel Corrie was an American young woman who went to Gaza in 2003, and she was killed, I believe, in March. I believe it was around now, this time of year. She was bulldozed. She was killed by an Israeli bulldozer, trying to, non-violently. She was a non-violent activist with International Solidarity Movement. I was in International Solidarity Movement the year before that. Actually, I was in Gaza, but she stood in front of a bulldozer, and the bulldozer bulldozed her and killed her, and she's revered as a martyr in Palestine, the way Palestinians revere martyrs, and elsewhere. And I just, the International Solidarity Movement is a non-violent movement, and it's just like the violent, the armed struggle is avenging the non-violent movement. March 20th, Iraq declares force majeure on oil contracts. I learned force majeure for this war. It means they're not going to fulfill their oil contracts. And that could be a step towards regaining oil independence. For people who don't know, Iraq's oil revenue all goes to an American bank, which then releases the funds as Iraq has to give a good reason for them to get their own oil revenue back. Now, if Iraq says force majeure and then starts trading in Chinese yuan, shipping through the Straits of Hormuz, this could be the beginning of Iraq actually gaining oil independence from the US. And in some sense, people have been saying on Twitter today, the occupation of Iraq is finally over, or is finally coming to an end, because the Americans are leaving some of these bases. And Iraq has declared force majeure on the oil contracts. If the Americans can't physically control the oil and Iraq declares force majeure, then there won't be any more money going into that account anyway. And you could write it off, because the Americans are never going to, whatever's in there, the Americans are never going to give you anyway. Hezbollah on March 20th released a video explaining kind of like why they started their attack. And it's like it's an attack. I mean, it's a video where they talk about how Israel was getting ready to attack them. Israel was thinking, they described the Israeli thinking as like the Israelis were thinking that they should preempt an attack from Lebanon because it would be a good time to attack Israel while Iran was attacking Israel. And Hezbollah said, you're correct. It was a good time. And so while they were deciding whether to the timing of Israel's preemptive attack, Hezbollah already had begun to attack them. And on March 20th, I saw a clip. I think the speech, Abdel Malik al-Houthi's speeches are always on the 19th, are always on the Thursday. But one of the things he says is like, the Quran didn't tell you to surrender. So he says, even animals can tell enemy from friend by instinct, yet Arab leaders still see their worst enemies as friends. Abdel Malik al-Houthi is always there for many years in his sermons, has always attacked the complicity and foolishness of the Gulf. And here we are. It's all coming to fruition. So March 21st, 2 days ago, Trump gives the ultimatum. He says, if Hormuz is not open in 48 hours, he says, we're going to start destroying your power plants. And at the same time, the U.S. Treasury said we're lifting sanctions on Iranian oil. They're not going to be able to get the money, but if it's at sea, we're going to lift sanctions on it so that we can get more oil into the system. And one of the Iranian politicians, the Speaker of the Parliament, said, he put a little sign up saying, "Sorry, we're sold out." So they don't like, it's just like very it's a lot like when the European the EU basically said, we're going to force Russia to sell us oil at a discount to punish them for attacking Ukraine. And Putin was like, we're not going to sell you oil at a discount. We're not in the business of doing that. And that was that. It's sort of like you forget that you need the consent of the person you're trying to punish on some level. On March 21st, Professor Morandi said 20 countries are aligning with the new framework for Hormuz, where you pay a fee to pass in renminbi, in the Chinese currency. China didn't want to force de-dollarization, but Iran has every reason to do that. And so that's where we're at. China is now going to have the currency that trades, that oil is traded in, if they want to go that way, which is, where most of the oil has to go that way. And then there was a bombing in Isfahan, which looked like a mushroom cloud. It was a massive bombing in Isfahan and Natanz. On the 20th, an Iranian nuclear facility in Natanz was attacked by the Israelis. And Iran said, we're going to hit nuclear infrastructure, and they hit Dimona and Arad very hard. So they showed the destruction. Even potentially dead Netanyahu visited. Ben Gvir visited. So these physical bodies of these Israeli leaders were photographed, at least, at the sites of destruction. Of course, it's impossible now for Netanyahu to convince people he's alive, because even these pictures of him at the site, people are like, no, those are old photos from a different site from June. So Iran also on the 21st said they've been studying the weaknesses of the U.S. and the Israelis. The Israelis' missile shield is basically down. One of the politicians says, from this moment, Mustavi is his name, he says, from this moment, I declare missile dominance over the skies of the occupied territories. Galibaf said, if the Israeli regime fails to intercept the missiles in highly protected Dimona, it is operationally a sign of entering a new phase of the battle. Israel's skies are defenseless. As a result, it seems the time has come to implement the next pre-designed plans. The spokesman of the military, Ibrahim Rezai, I think is his name, he says, more advanced systems have entered the battlefield for a new round of operations. with direct impact, and the battlefield will become narrower and more difficult for the enemy than before. One Iranian spokesman said, and I haven't verified this, but he said, we don't need nuclear weapons because we have other weapons. He said they have a 200-kilometer radius electromagnetic pulse weapon, which basically shuts all electronics down. It could very well be true. On the 21st of March, the Iranians also said they shot down F-16s, one or more F-16s, which is another major big deal. Ori Goldberg, who's a Israeli, who kind of talks about, he talks about how Israeli society is going, and it's not psychologically, and it's not very good. Like in terms, he doesn't, he doesn't, like, not that they're losing morale, but just how out of touch with the rest of humanity they are. But he noticed something. He said that Israel scrambles jets now after every missile siren, and people kind of quote tweeted him and said that's because Israel doesn't have the warning, and they're worried about their jets being destroyed on the tarmac. So they're scrambling to get them in the air rather than have them get destroyed on the ground. Trump makes the threat that if no one helps open the Strait of Hormuz, that he'll reopen the conversation about taking over Greenland. Iran's police chief, Ahmad Reza Radan, says, well, listen, Europe, if you can't protect Greenland, why don't you just ask us and we'll protect it for you? So they're trolling Europe at this point. There was a speech reported by Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader. I didn't find the speech, but someone very credible, Marwa Osman, who I find very credible, she's with Press TV, and she says, Mojtaba Khamenei made a statement about their demands, a new security framework, a new Hormuz, and U.S. out of the region entirely, right? And they're not talking about Israel, actually, because they don't believe in talking about or to Israel. Abu Obaida, the spokesman for the Qassam Brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, said this. He said, we take great pride at the powerful strikes. This Nazi Zionist enemy understands only the language of strength, and retaliating with double the force, making it pay a heavy price is what will force it to stop its aggression. Otherwise, it will continue its recklessness and target our Arab and Islamic countries one by one. And he would know. And Abu Obaida, is right? Like, if Iran doesn't win, they're going to be put in this Iraq position, this Syria, Iraq, Libya, whatever position, to be alternatingly sanctioned, bombed. One probably another pseudonym. And yeah, he said, we have to either accept Israel's terror bombing or establish deterrence, right? So here's a story that it's one of those stories that may have happened or not. But an Al Jazeera commentator went on TV and said, let's kill children in Iran and make them really feel it. And Iran issued a notice saying, you'd better evacuate Al Jazeera, we're going to bomb it. And then apparently Qatar said, listen, we won't do it again, we apologize. And Iran said, never mind, we won't bomb it. Now, maybe these are all, none of these, I didn't dig into the story to see how true it was, but the whole thing rings true. Like, I know that the comment happened. I know that some Qatari, went on Al Jazeera and said we should kill children. And after that, I'm not sure. It could very well be that Iran made the threat and Qatar made Al Jazeera back off. But it is also like, for people who use Al Jazeera, you should know that this is very much part of the acceptable discourse on Al Jazeera. Is that kind of hatred and hateful positions against Iran. By March 21st, it looks like the main military base in Iraq, Victoria Base, is maybe being evacuated, and I think it was. yesterday. Yemen, al-Bukhaiti makes the case, a positive case for destroying the Gulf oil infrastructure. Again, Bukhaiti is so, there's nothing like it, right? There's nothing like Ansar Allah, and in Ansar Allah, there's no one like Bukhaiti. Bukhaiti says, the damage inflicted on the Ummah as a result of oil money in the Gulf states has been far greater than that of oil money in the state of Texas. Accordingly, targeting Gulf oil and gas facilities represents a tactical and strategic interest for all sons of the Arab and Islamic Ummah. Okay, there's something going on with Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi. They're having meetings about security, but I don't think that any of these countries are in a great position to attack Iran on behalf of Israel. So, Egypt... Turkey doesn't commit to anything, so Turkey will do whatever benefits them without having to commit to anything. I don't think their lack of commitment in one way is also works in Iran's favor in this case. They, arguably they committed to the destruction of Syria in 2024, but even that they did with some degree of deniability, right? They have this Jolani creature, and I don't think they felt like their commitment paid off in Syria. So are they going to try to attack Iran now? I don't know. It's possible, but I think that would require more commitment than they're willing to do. Egypt it's a similar story. Like if Israel wins. If Israel wins and Iran is destroyed and genocided, which is Israel's goal, Egypt and Turkey are clearly next, and it doesn't matter what they do. So I don't know. I'm sure Egypt knows. At this point, I will never count on them to do anything good. But I don't know how much resources they're willing to put in or how many people they're willing to send to their deaths on behalf of Israel. Compared to the Gulf. The Gulf, they've put on their uniforms and they're going to sacrifice their lives like any American soldier. But Egypt, Pakistan too. Pakistan is currently in an active war with Afghanistan. They have their hands full. Attacking Iran, it's not in their skill set. They've been pretty focused on Afghanistan and covert warfare for decades now. They are always paranoid about India attacking them. They had a little war with India a while ago. I'm sure they were pleasantly surprised in some ways, but they can't, Pakistan and India can't win against each other anymore. So Pakistan worried about India, engaged in Afghanistan, basically only really able to do things in Afghanistan, not going deep energy and food issues that are not going to be helped by fighting a war with Iran on behalf of Israel. They have a popular president or prime minister that's in prison. He's in prison because he was overthrown because he showed too much independence from America, too much support for Palestine, too much not wanting to fight Afghanistan on their behalf. And now he's in jail and people still want him back. So it's a bit of a mess. Pakistan, I don't think, is in a good position to go start fighting Iran on behalf of the Americans. But then nobody else is either, and they're doing it. So who knows? Who knows what kinds of bad and counterproductive moves will follow the terrible and counterproductive moves that have come up to date. On March 22nd, we've reached yesterday, Iran announced that they're going to attack the U.S. and foreign presence in Jordan. Some of that has happened today. If you look at a map, we are getting closer and closer to Israel in terms of like where the Americans are retreating and where the Iranians are attacking. The Iranian military spokesman, Ibrahim, again, he said, "We pledge to remain steadfast until beloved Palestine returns free and proud to its rightful owners." So that's a strong statement after Abu Ubaidah that they view a link. Everything that Iran has done and suffered in some ways has had to do with Palestine, with not abandoning Palestine. Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, said there's no longer any room to talk to the Americans. Ghalibaf responded to the 48-hour deadline strongly yesterday. He said, immediately after the power plants and infrastructure in our country are targeted, the critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and oil facilities throughout the region will be considered legitimate targets and destroyed in an irreversible manner, and the price of oil will remain high for a long time. Okay. It's important to note, too, that Iran existed for a long time before oil and gas. Iran has a better infrastructure for surviving this than any of the other countries, the Gulf or Israel. There's this person on that called Shale Tier 7 that the algorithm fed me yesterday, and he says, I am just a guy that likes making my maps, but I do feel somewhat compelled to say Iran has a particularly good power grid and gas distribution network, like nearly impossible to destroy. I mean, I think gas has a better gas. Iran has a better gas transmission footprint than Canada. I don't know who this tweet is for, but maybe these maps are helpful. In 2017, Iran exported 7,800 gigawatt hours and imported 4, mainly exporting to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Iran's 4.3 megawatt hours of annual electricity consumption is in line with the UK and ahead of countries like Brazil and South Africa. Attacking a very hardened system like this and opening the Gulf up to attacks on far more single failure point assets seems wildly stupid. So that was a hot take based on a map. A quick look at the maps. So you probably saw in Gaza that the Israeli soldiers tortured a 1-year-old child with cigarette burns and a nail to torture his father, who they kidnapped. This kind of thing is like why we're all more or less ready for the world to end, if it has to end to stop Israel. Then it's worth it. I don't want to live in a world where people can do this to 1-year-olds and nobody can do anything about it. So, I remember I go back to this, like when they were making nuclear threats against Russia and Putin said, I don't see a point in a world without Russia. And I don't see a point in a world where soldiers can torture a 1-year-old by burning cigarettes on his skin. No, I don't see it. So on March 22nd, also the UAE said, we don't want a ceasefire. You know what? We don't want a ceasefire. We don't want to live with the threat of Iran. And again, this is by joining the belligerency, they're basically giving license to, if Iran wins, redraw the map, which they probably have to do. If you're saying you cannot coexist as this monarchy, then what follows after the war will presumably take that into account. False flags on March 22nd. Israel probably did a false flag on Cyprus and on Diego Garcia. These are bases that are far from Iran. Iran did not announce them first, and Iran denied them after. And as we have noted, Iran says what they're going to do, and then they do it. So these were very likely Israel trying to get more investment from the West. And as I noted, there's no additional power that the UAE or Gulf or whatever, or for that matter, France and Britain are going to bring to the table. If the US can't win this by themselves, then the US plus the Gulf plus France and Germany and the UK can't win this either. Again, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt are other wild cards, but they have their own problems, and none of them are slam dunks in terms of working either. Okay, Lebanon on the front. Yesterday, there were really well coordinated attacks between Hezbollah and Iran. They're attacking on the Israeli side too of the border, not just with rockets and missiles, but infiltrating lines of defense. So Lebanon, Hezbollah is they're doing, militarily speaking, extremely confident operations. And with, there's almost a new military phenomenon of combined arms warfare where, in the American, you're an American in Iraq, you have infantry and you're going in to attack, the Sunni insurgency, and then you call in an airstrike, and then some minutes later, a plane comes and bombs an American warplane comes and bombs the area that you identified or you spotted. And it seems like you have a situation in Lebanon where Hezbollah and their drones, their small, undetectable surveillance drones, can go and surveil the Israelis and communicate somehow to Iran, and Iran follow minutes later, not very long, because a battle can take hours sometimes, and minutes later can follow with ballistic missile attacks. This is new. This is new and different. Air superiority from 1,000 kilometers away via missile. Science fiction. The future is here. So March 23rd, this morning, Trump starts the day by saying we're in talks. People think maybe Witkoff and Kushner told him there were talks. There aren't talks. Iran clarifies there are no talks. But that ultimatum of and people think it's market manipulation. He made this announcement before the markets opened. Somebody went and bought billions of dollars of oil when the price went down. They'll presumably sell it again when the price goes back up. They dumped other stocks. I don't know. The market manipulation by Trump making the announcement, and then they make the moves in the market, knowing that the markets are going to respond by the price of oil dropping because they think the war is going to end. And then when they realize the war is not going to end, they go back up. So that idea, Iran has clearly stated that they're going to destroy the oil infrastructure if they're attacked, and apparently in the recent hours, they did target Isfahan and Khorramshahr power plants and gas. So now presumably Iran has attacked Kuwait and is going to continue the destruction of power plants and energy infrastructure. It could happen today. If it doesn't happen today, I assume it will happen at some point in this war. Okay, what about, before I finish, just to wrap up tonight, March 23rd, as of tonight, there's more like 15,000 troops, U.S. troops, Army and Marines, en route towards the Iran direction. It's not big enough to take the Iranian coastline. Even if they brought 1 million troops, I don't think they could take the Iranian coastline. But it's a big group of troops, and like I said, they're going to use it for something. Lots of reasons and possibilities to have troops, I guess, out of Jordan, Israel, or Africa. I think Africa could be another possibility. We'll see. Maybe they will take the island, but the more troops they get and send there in that direction, the less I think it's about Karg Island or opening Hormuz. I think it's probably getting troops in place for a whole number of different missions that they might be called on to do, including possibly evacuation of VIPs. When when Congo was decolonized in 1960, the Belgians sent a whole bunch of troops to get all the white people out. Getting white people out is like one of the things that they did in all the decolonizing countries in the 1960s. So who knows? Maybe that's what it's about, or something else, something sneaky. We can't know what is going to happen, but we know that if it's the Americans and the Israelis, it's going to be something sneaky, it's going to be something surprising, and it's going to involve killing people. Probably people who have nothing to do with anything military. So that concludes tonight, and that concludes this week. A couple of other notes, okay, and these are things that I've tweeted. One is if you're following someone who's very critical, I'm very critical of Israel. I've been critical of Israel, you know who I'm talking about. But if you're critical of Israel, but then you say things like Iran's never going to get what they, are demanding, and Israel's forever, right? And like Israel is going to, Israel's never going to be stopped, whatever. Or you're saying Iran needs to stop now because they've restored deterrence and they could reach diminishing returns. Like if you're living in a future that is inhabited by Zionism and Israel and the US, and you're sort of like, they're going to be there forever, you're still doing Zionism. This is still Zionism. And I would say to people, like, watch out for any analysis that sort of lives in the future, any analysis that, if you're making predictions, like, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about agendas. It makes a lot of sense to talk about resources, to talk about what people are trying to do, what people want, what people say they want to do. You can even assess, there's nothing wrong with assessing feasibility. There's nothing wrong with if and then and gaming things out, but like predictions, dicey stuff, living in the future, saying that's not going to happen. It's usually an expression of what people want, right? It's not an expression of what, and they might say this is not what I want, but I'm saying Israel can't be defeated, or I'm not saying I want this, but those American bases aren't going anywhere. Like the American bases are destroyed already. They're in smoking, hulking ruins. People who say they're not going anywhere, like they're gone. So like watch for people who use present. I like the present tense, the past tense. I think it's a hard enough thing to figure out what the hell happened, what the hell just happened, what is happening. So getting into the future is iffy, especially like when you realize there are different futures. So why are you spending so much time in this Israel future, right? It's their chosen future. So don't live there. Don't join anybody there. When someone's trying to take you to that future, don't live there. Come back to the present, or, think of a desirable future. Think of strategies to bring about the desirable future. And then the other thing analysts, including friendlies, will lapse into is like I've mentioned this back in June, the if Iran genre. So Iran should do this, Iran needs to do this, etc. Iran didn't. I for the most part keep what I would do if I ran Iran to myself. But even in my private thoughts, I had if I ran Iran thoughts, and Iran has never done what I would have done, and they're doing better than they would be if I ran Iran, I would say. So that's tonight. I think I've went way over an hour now. I'm probably close to 2 hours. And so I don't know what to do, whether that means I have to be more frequent or whether that means I have to do less per day or organize it differently. But while I'm talking about that, I'm making the video longer. So hang in there for the video. If you've hung in there, you've reached the end of the video. And we'll see you in the next one.